Hey guys, welcome back for today's video. Got three brand new polls that have been released over this past day, one of them from California and two of them taking a look at the national picture of the Democratic primary, and it continues to be very good news for the Vermont Senator, Bernie Sanders, whereas Joe Biden has been taking steps back, Michael Bloomberg has been taking steps forward, and we're just getting a really interesting dynamic right now in the race following the Iowa caucus as well as the most recent debate that we just had. So I want to start here taking a look at these updated polling numbers from Capital Weekly out of California, and then after that going into a bit more depth from the Morning Consult as well as Ipsos with their national numbers. So starting off here with Capital Weekly, the California poll, the sample size in this instance is 843 respondents, and Bernie Sanders, he gains 4 percentage points from the prior result, up to 29%, and opening up quite a significant margin between himself and the rest of the field, where Elizabeth Warren loses 5 percentage points. She was at 21 now, and this one at 16. Buttigieg takes a little bit of a step forward, gaining 3 points, up to 14% in third place. Michael Bloomberg also a large step forward from him, and we've seen this from Bloomberg in a lot of these polls where he's taking quite significant steps forward, and it feels like as Joe Biden has been receding, a lot of his support appears to be shifting over towards Michael Bloomberg. And the dynamic that everyone was expecting for the most part coming into primary season was the progressive Bernie Sanders against the centrist Joe Biden, battling it out at the top throughout this process. But with the weakness that Biden has shown in the Iowa caucus, and he's not looking so great in the New Hampshire primary, we'll have to see where he ends up finishing later on this evening. But a lot of his voters were supporting him given the fact that they felt like he was going to be the toughest matchup against Donald Trump and the most electable. And when you're coming in as the electability candidate and you do significantly worse than what people are expecting, then that can shake the confidence in your support. And it seems like to an extent that Biden support has been shifting behind Bloomberg, and that's what the dynamic could end up being as we work our way through primary season, where the progressives coalesce behind Bernie Sanders and the centrists get behind Bloomberg, and that could end up being the dynamic as opposed to Sanders versus Biden at the top. So we can see here, again, Bloomberg taking a big step forward, gaining 7 percentage points up to 13%. Joe Biden loses 10 percentage points down to 11%. He was at 21 in the prior result. Amy Klobuchar gains a point up to 5. Andrew Yang takes quite a big step back here out in California, loses 4 percentage points. He was at 8, now he's at 4. And then everyone else is at 3 percentage points or less. And it's an unfortunate situation for Andrew Yang. He actually didn't do terrible in the Iowa caucus in relation to what the polls were saying, but he wasn't able to get to that 15 percentage point threshold in many of the caucuses. So even though he did all right in terms of the first round, the final alignment didn't look great for him. And then there just hasn't been a lot in the news surrounding Yang after the Iowa caucus. He was able to get on the debate stage, but again, it was another one of those situations where he was on the debate stage but didn't get all that much in the way of talking time. He has a hard time kind of injecting himself into the discussion that is had around these debates, and he kind of fades back and doesn't necessarily have as many positive moments as we see from some of these other candidates that really force their way into the conversation on the debate stage. So this is the updated numbers from California, and with California moving their primary date all the way up to Super Tuesday, and with how many pledged delegates they have up for grabs, and it's an extremely important state, Bernie Sanders opening up a pretty decent margin in this particular poll. We'll see how things actually play out when we reach Super Tuesday, but if you have 5 or 6 candidates that are splitting up the vote, it could end up being a situation where whoever comes in second or third place has a tough time getting to that 15 percentage point threshold. In the fewer people that reach that threshold, it means whoever ends up getting first, in this place it would be Bernie Sanders, would get an even larger majority of that treasure trove of pledged delegates. So a best case scenario for Bernie Sanders would be getting something in that 30 plus percentage point range potentially, and then having the rest of the field kind of hovering right around or below the 15 percentage point threshold. That would be a very positive case for Sanders to pick up a lot of pledged delegates from California. Hey guys, so as I was uploading the video that I just made with 3 polls, of course, another brand new national poll just came out, so I thought I'd slide it in right here between the California and the national polls, this one coming from Monmouth. So the total number of polls in this video has been now upped to 4. And just some interesting data here where Bernie Sanders, in terms of his favorability among Democratic voters, he takes a step up here where he's at plus 53 in his net favorability, gaining 5 points from where he was in January. Elizabeth Warren takes a little bit of a step forward at plus 48, whereas Joe Biden, he falls off a cliff, loses 14 percentage points in that net favorable at just plus 38 now. Buttigieg there at plus 36, Klobuchar at plus 31, and this is where Bloomberg is going to have a hard time capturing a Democratic nomination. There's just not a lot of Democratic left-leaning voters that have an overwhelmingly positive view of Bloomberg. Now, in the following poll that I'm going to be touching on from the Morning Consult, he's doing better in that instance, but in this one, he's only at plus 14 in those net favorables. And then also scrolling down and taking a look at the first choice among these Democratic primary voters, huge changes here, particularly for Joe Biden. But starting at the top, you have Bernie Sanders taking a step forward. This is the best that he's pulled in a national Monmouth result since all the way back in March when he was at 25%. That was, of course, before Joe Biden had officially thrown his hat in the ring. And throughout this period of time, Monmouth hasn't necessarily been an overwhelmingly positive polling resource for Bernie Sanders, but trending in a positive direction in recent results, now taking the lead and by 10 percentage points over the second option. So you have Bernie Sanders gaining 3 points from the last result up to 26%. Biden losing 14 percentage points from where he was in January, now in second place at 16%. An utter collapse here from Biden with these numbers. Buttigieg gained 7 percentage points up to 13. Warren, more or less so where she was in the last result. She was at 14 now, and this one at 13. Bloomberg takes a step forward. He was at 9, now he's at 11. And after the Iowa caucus where Biden did so poorly, Buttigieg surprised with his strength. Buttigieg taking in some of that centrist vote. Also, with these Biden supporters getting nervous that he might not be the most electable after not showing success on Election Day. Some of them perhaps also transitioning over to somebody like a Michael Bloomberg or an Amy Klobuchar. And it's just all of this combined with the fact that Sanders has a very strong positive narrative at this point, and now Sanders leaps out into first place. He was down to Biden by 7% in the prior Monmouth national poll, and this one he's ahead by 10. So a net 17 percentage point swing in a very short period of time. Some fascinating data. So I'm going to move on with the rest of this video where I left off. All right, moving over to this week's Morning Consult, and of course, the weekly numbers that we get out of this resource, large sample size, over 15,000 likely voters from this survey that they do. And in comparison to where we were a week ago, certainly some shifting around the numbers where you have Bernie Sanders, who has taken the lead. He's bringing in 25% on the top line. In comparison to where he was a week ago, he gains 1 percentage point, whereas Joe Biden loses 6 percentage points in the result from last week. Biden was at 28%, and this one he's at just 22 percentage points. Still the most competitive there with Sanders at the top, but then again, you have Michael Bloomberg taking a step forward. He gains 3 percentage points. He's at 17 in third place. And then you have Pete Buttigieg. He gains 5 percentage points. He was at 6. Now he's at 11. It still seems to be an issue for Pete where, of course, he's showing a bit more strength in the first two states of Iowa and New Hampshire where he's put a ton of resources, but it's still a concern for him on a national scale where those numbers aren't lining up with what we're seeing in these early results. And part of that has to do with the fact that he's not doing all that well with minority voters, Hispanics, and African Americans, which is very important in terms of polling better nationally as opposed to areas like New Hampshire as well as Iowa. So then you have Elizabeth Warren, who fades back a bit here, loses 3 percentage points, also at 11%. And then you have Andrew Yang at 4, Klobuchar and Steyer at 3, and Michael Bennet, who for whatever reason is still in this race, is at 1 percentage point. And then also going over and taking a look at Super Tuesday votes. Some really interesting stuff here. So Joe Biden, he's out there on the campaign trail saying we're in this for the long haul. The early states, it's just a blip in what's a larger trend of how many elections that we're going to have throughout this process. So don't worry about it and don't put too much of an emphasis on these particular results. So he is pegging a lot of his potential success on Super Tuesday, but given the weakness of these early results, he takes a big step back where now he's 7 percentage points behind Bernie Sanders in those Super Tuesday voter states. So Sanders leads the way at 27%. Joe Biden follows him at 20%. Then you have Michael Bloomberg at 16%. And then Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg, they mirror pretty similarly their national numbers at 11 and 10 percentage points respectively. Yang at 5, Klobuchar and Steyer each at 3 percentage points as well. And I did a little bit of a discussion on Pete, and even though he's showing strength in Iowa and New Hampshire, it doesn't necessarily translate to national success. That's also the case right now for Amy Klobuchar. She has had some positive moments. She did pretty good in the most recent debate. She had something in the way of votes in Iowa. That was supposed to be a really strong state for her, given that it's bordering to Minnesota. Maybe she surprises in New Hampshire later on this evening. Maybe that gives her a boost, but she's still having issues in terms of getting a ton of votes and support with these national polls, even more so than what we're seeing from Pete Buttigieg. Actually, Klobuchar, based on a lot of the polls that we see, she does even worse among minority voters than what Pete Buttigieg does. So there's a lot of inroads that those particular centrist candidates are going to make if they're going to seriously compete with the upper tier centrist candidates. Right now, that would be a Joe Biden as well as a Michael Bloomberg. And now tracking the race over time, and I've gone over almost every single morning consult poll throughout this past year, and we can see the clear trend lines here throughout this period where Joe Biden made his announcement. He boosted way up there to 40%, then he kind of receded back, and then he was hovering more or less right around that 30 percentage point number. But after the Iowa caucus, we see a big fall off in his chart where now Sanders, just a consistent, steady rise from him over the past couple of months. He gets a boost up after the Iowa caucus, now into that first place position. But also Michael Bloomberg, he throws his hat in the ring, starts his ad campaign, kind of hovering around the single digits, and then in recent weeks he takes a big step up, now to 17% of support. Then you have this purple line, Elizabeth Warren. She peaked back in October, and ever since that point in time, she's fallen back quite considerably to that 11% where Pete Buttigieg now finds himself. Buttigieg had that rise back in November, then he kind of leveled off, dipped a bit, but now he's back up there at 11% following the result that we saw from him in the Iowa caucus. And those are the trend lines that we're seeing from these candidates right now, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of trends that we continue to see from this race as we work our way through the New Hampshire primary, then the Nevada caucus, then the South Carolina primary, and then leading up into the all-important Super Tuesday. And taking a look at the second choice among these upper-tier candidates, so Sanders supporters, their second choice is Warren at 29, Biden at 23, and actually Andrew Yang there at 12 percentage points. Biden supporters, it's Bernie at 28, Bloomberg at 23, Warren at 16. I expect Biden to be in this race for a considerable period of time, at least past Super Tuesday. We'll see how that date shapes up for Biden. Maybe if he doesn't have as much success as what people expected him to have on Super Tuesday, maybe that's where he finally starts seriously considering stepping down. And if he steps down, then his vote is going to be split up more so with Sanders and Bloomberg. And I made this statement last night on my Twitter where the only things that I'm sure about right now with these campaigns is that Sanders and Bloomberg are going to be here all the way till the convention. All of the other campaigns, I'm less bullish on that they're going to be able to make it to that point in this process. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not. So then we have Bloomberg supporters. Again, I expect him to be in this throughout, so his second choice maybe doesn't mean as much as some of these other candidates who could bow out at some point in time. Then you have Buttigieg. It's actually relatively split up among the rest of the candidates, where you have Bloomberg at 20, Biden at 19, and then Sanders and Warren each at 17 percentage points respectively. And then also Warren, we'll see how long she ends up sticking this out. I expect her probably to go at least through Super Tuesday, but her funding has been drying up. She hasn't been doing great in some of these areas that she was really hoping that she would have a lot of success in. We'll see what she's able to do in New Hampshire later on this evening, but her supporters overwhelmingly go to Sanders compared to the rest of the field. So you have 35% for Sanders and then 17 for Biden, 14 for Buttigieg. So if Warren steps down, that would be potentially a big get for Sanders at the top. And if we end up getting this dynamic where it's Sanders versus Bloomberg, and you have Biden step down and Warren step down, that's a boost to Sanders in each of those instances. And if you get Pete Buttigieg to step down, it kind of splits up among the rest of the candidates more evenly. So kind of a dynamic that could play out there that would be more beneficial to Sanders than what it might be to Bloomberg. And then looking at the favorabilities of all these candidates, we're back to a situation where Sanders significantly has the best overall net favorables at plus 53, the difference between his favorables to unfavorables, where you have Biden, who's plus 43. So Sanders does 10 percentage points better in that net favorability than what Biden's at. We've also seen a lot of positive gains from Michael Bloomberg with his favorables compared to when he first threw his hat in the ring. He was almost kind of at a 50-50 split between favorable, unfavorable. But when you have these ads consistently playing, that's kind of puff pieces for your campaign, and you've largely been able to avoid going through severe scrutiny, that's probably going to change here coming up with him becoming more of a factor, but right now he's plus 40% to the net favorables. Elizabeth Warren is plus 41. Pete Buttigieg is plus 42, but not quite as high with his overall favorables, but he's also a bit lower with his unfavorables. And you can see how the rest of the field shapes up beyond Pete Buttigieg. Everyone's a bit lower than that in terms of their net favorables. So just one more poll to take a look at here. This one coming from Ipsos. And yet another poll where we have Bernie Sanders taking the lead at the top at 20% of support. Some interesting stuff in this one comes with where independent voters are at 18% for Sanders, whereas the rest of the field is in single digits, other than Michael Bloomberg, who's also able to pick up 13% of those individuals. But then all the registered voters together, you have Sanders at 20% in first place, followed by Joe Biden at 17%, Michael Bloomberg at 15%, and then the rest of the field, you have Warren at 11%, you have Pete Buttigieg at 8%, and then everyone else is even lower than that. And we hear about Klomentum, with Klobuchar gaining momentum. That's a phrase that I've seen thrown around. Again, these national polls have not been all that great for her, even though the early states of Iowa and New Hampshire have been a bit more bullish. Again, these national numbers are a concern for the Klobuchar campaign, where she's at 3 percentage points in this instance. And then moving down, they say, if your first choice dropped out, who would you support? And the second choice here, Bernie Sanders also does well in this instance, bringing in 23%. Biden at 18%, Warren at 15%, Michael Bloomberg and Pete Buttigieg each at 12% in that category. And then the head-to-head matchups here. So we have Joe Biden defeating Donald Trump in the head-to-head matchup, 44% to 42%, so beating him by 2 percentage points. And he's able to defeat Trump by 14 percentage points among the independents. But Bernie Sanders, by far and away the best in terms of winning those independent voters. We see his head-to-head matchup against Sanders versus Trump, at least in this particular poll. Not necessarily universally the case, but definitely a positive sign here for Sanders. So he has a 4-point lead over Trump, and a lot of that is baked in to his 18 percentage point advantage among independents. And then we see Trump versus Warren. It's a 50-50 tie, 42 to 42, where Warren is only leading those independents by 5 percentage points. And then Trump versus Buttigieg, it's tied at 41 percentage points. Buttigieg has an 8% lead among the independent voters. Bloomberg also is able to pick up a 4 percentage point lead against Donald Trump, 45 to 41, and he's able to grab a 14% lead among those independents. So in terms of this head-to-head matchup, Bloomberg and Sanders had the best numbers, each 4 percentage points against Donald Trump, and then Sanders had the best numbers overall in terms of support among those independent voters. And now taking a look at the issues, which candidate is the best on immigration? Pretty competitive at the top, but you have Sanders leading the way at 17, followed by Biden at 15. The best on healthcare, this is where Sanders does really well. He's at 28% in first place. Also Elizabeth Warren there at 17. So the Medicare for All candidates are polling the best in terms of where these voters see the strength on healthcare and who they align with. That's where Sanders and Warren are doing better than the rest of the field, where you have Biden there at 13, Bloomberg at 12, and Pete Buttigieg. This just goes to show you, when you try to please everybody, you end up not pleasing anyone, because Pete Buttigieg, he's only at 6% with those who think he's the best on healthcare, and his plan is Medicare for all who want it. You can keep your private insurance if you want. You can buy into Medicare. A very convoluted plan, in my opinion, and it doesn't really change the status quo all that much. He tried to please everyone with how he framed his particular healthcare plan, and he ends up not winning over the voters in this instance, where he's only at 6%, being the best on healthcare, so it's not translating for him as much as he would have wanted it to. So then, best on the environment, you have Sanders at 21, Elizabeth Warren at 14. Best on the economy, you have Bloomberg actually does the best in this category at 23%, and then Bernie at 19, Biden at 14, Warren at 12. And then most likely to beat Donald Trump. This is where Biden has had most of his strength throughout primary, or leading into primary season, in terms of the votes that we've seen from Biden over, the past handful of months. But these numbers have significantly faded with Biden not doing well in Iowa. Now it's a tie at the top here with who is most likely to beat Donald Trump, where you have Bernie at 23, along with Joe Biden, who's also at 23, and then Bloomberg's there at 16. And then a strong progressive, not a big surprise here, where Bernie and Warren lead the way at 27 and 17 percentage points, respectively. Not sure who these 10% of individuals are who think Michael Bloomberg is a strong progressive. He's definitely going into that centrist lane. That's what he's trying to occupy. And then can unify the Democratic Party. Fairly competitive here at the top, but you have Biden leading it at 19, Sanders at 17. a new and different voice is where Pete Buttigieg is finally able to have his best numbers here at 23%, followed by Bernie and Bloomberg. They're at 16, Bernie at 15. And then best on national security, this is where Biden does his best, probably given his ties to Obama, the fact that he was vice president for 8 years. People have confidence in his ability on national security, where he's at 26%. And then you have Bernie Sanders at 14, Bloomberg at 10. And that's all I wanted to touch on here from this Ipsos poll. And if you'd like to take a look at any of the polls that I went through in today's video, I'll have links to them all posted down in the video description. I appreciate you guys stopping by. I'm going to be making a ton of content going over the results of the New Hampshire primary, updating the pledged delegate tracker, going over my predictions. So a lot of videos upcoming. If you want to get those, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you back here for those videos that are upcoming.